Hello, everyone, and welcome to Straight to You, live from the Oxnard Police Department. My name is Paul Carganilla. I am the Community Affairs Manager for the Oxnard Police Department, and we'd like to invite you to interact with us live here tonight. It's a couple of minutes after 5:30 p.m. here on the West Coast, and if you're watching us live, we invite you to ask us any questions that you might have for our special guests here this evening. But if you are watching a replay, just know that we won't see the questions until probably after the program is over. But for the next 30 minutes or so, we have a very special guest, and it is my pleasure to introduce our newest assistant chief here at the Oxnard Police Department, Assistant Chief Denise Shadinger. Welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here.
So glad to have you. And just first and foremost, am I saying that right? Shadinger.
Yes. So shading, like shading when you're drawing a shadow or the shading of a tree, and then at the end.
Okay, perfect. I had been asked a couple of times by a couple of different people, and I'm like, yeah, it's Shadinger, I think. Just making sure. So thank you again so much for joining us here tonight. It's such a pleasure to have you on. We've done this over the last year, when COVID hit and 2020 made it really difficult for us to actually get out within the community and interact with people. We found that this was a great way to answer any questions that people have out there. And Maricela Contreras is watching on Facebook. She says, welcome and congratulations. And I think that sentiment has been echoed many times since you were promoted, and your promotion went into effect. What was the date of that?
The 23rd of January is when it went into effect.
Okay, so a little under a month ago, a few weeks ago, and so congratulations. And obviously you are no stranger to the department, so we'll talk about all of your experience here. And what I like to do at the very beginning of these is just to rewind it all the way back to the very, very beginning, to which I say, Denise Shadinger, born and raised.
I was actually born in New Jersey.
Okay.
And I moved out to Oxnard because that's where my mom and her family are from. At the end of the third grade, started the fourth grade at Haycox Elementary and lived in the Southwinds neighborhood. I actually lived there when it used to be Alaric Street instead of Cuesta del Mar.
Wow.
And there was a name change several years later. I lived on Charles Street, South J Street, and Perkins Road. So kind of lived all around the Southwinds neighborhood there. Went to Haycox Elementary. Then went to, for some reason, the school boundaries are a little odd down there. Instead of going to EO Green Elementary, which is actually closer, I went to Blackstock Elementary, which is much further walk from the Southwinds neighborhood. And then I went to Wainimi High School.
Wow. So from fourth grade on, you've been here on the south end of Oxnard.
Yes.
And so when you were going to high school, at what point in your life did you have any inkling of like wanting to do this as a career? Did it start early, or was it like after high school?
It was after high school, definitely. I had a friend who wanted to go to the Reserve Academy. And for those of you who don't know, a reserve police officer is someone who volunteers their time, goes through almost a complete police academy, gets all the same training, and then they get hired on by a police department. And they come and basically do all the job a police officer does, but they do it for free. So a friend of mine wanted to go to the Reserve Academy, and at the time it was run through Ventura College. Didn't want to do it by herself. So I said, yeah, sure, that sounds like a lot of fun. Enrolled in the course. And that's kind of how I got my first taste of what police work was like, what the job entailed, what the training was all about, the physical agility aspect of it, or the physical training, the PT training. And after that was in 1994, the end of 1994, I was Reserve Academy class 94 too, for any of you out there in Facebook land who went to the Reserve Academy. And then I was hired by the Santa Paula Police Department in 1995. And I worked for them as a reserve police officer for about 6 months until December of 1995, when I was hired by the Oxnard Police Department and I started the academy in 1996, January of 1996.
Wow. But correct. So you went, the first step, let me just rewind real quick so I understand. The first step was Ventura College. And then you continued your education, or you got hired before you continued your education elsewhere?
Yes, I actually did all my college classes, got my degree, went on to get a bachelor degree, went on to get a master's degree after I'd been hired at the police department. But the first step to go to the Reserve Academy was actually to enroll in Ventura College because they did it as part of their curriculum.
I see. Okay, because I knew you had Gonzaga, right? Where your bachelor's?
My master's is from Gonzaga.
Master's from Gonzaga. And so that was all done online.
Yeah, most of it, yes. My bachelor's was all done online, and that was back in the day when online learning was just starting out. Some of the stuff that you completed, the assignments, you actually mailed them in. You got your coursework online, but you mailed in some stuff.
Wow.
And then now we've advanced much more into online learning and made it available to people who work full-time jobs, and they can go to actual brick and mortar universities but do an online program. And that's what I did through Gonzaga for my master's. However, I did have to travel to the university for the start of a couple courses. And then I actually did part of my coursework. We stayed at a monastery and learned about community. So it was a very interesting experience.
Wow. And so you did all of this while you were already working here?
Yes.
Wow. So for anyone who's considering a career in which they can continue their education, I'll just go ahead and mention that would be obviously you're a shining example that this would be a great option.
Oh, definitely. I was the officer who was working the graveyard shift. We call it the morning shift here. Back when it was, you started at 9 o'clock at night, you ended your shift at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then I was going to Ventura College for the first part of my associate's degree for 8 o'clock classes. I go from 8 to noon, and then I go home and sleep, and then go back to work the next night at 9 o'clock. So
That's crazy. But gosh, I applaud your dedication and commitment to your education. That's so great. Now we're gonna field most of the questions that come in live through here, the Facebook chat, toward the end of the conversation. But I just have to ask, because we're so close to it in the story, Maricela wants to know what happened to your friend that you joined the reserves with. Did she become an officer too?
she did not. She actually got injured, and that prevented her from completing it. And she is now working as a nurse out in the Palmdale, Palm Springs area.
And you're still friends?
Yeah, actually, we reconnected
Nice.
after the Facebook post of me getting promoted.
Really?
Yes.
Very cool. Thank goodness for social media, right?
Right.
So you started with the department, you said in 96?
Yes.
And what was the academy still 6 months at that time?
It was about 6 months long, and I graduated in the end of June of 1996.
And then you just never really looked back. So obviously through your 25 years here, you've had a slew of different assignments. Can you kind of just in your mind go chronologically to what your journey has been since you were hired here at the department?
Well, the first step for any officer is to work patrol. So you're out, black and white police car, answering calls for service. My first assignment after completing my field training and after working patrol for several years was to be a field training officer. And that's the officer that new officers are assigned to, that trains them in paperwork, what happens on a call for service, how to respond to call for service, and basically gives them all the real on-the-job training that you're getting after the academy.
I'll just pause you right there for a second to ask, what sticks out in your mind? Are there any memories from when you were either a trainee or a field training officer, a lesson that you learned early on that you found yourself looking back on and finding to be valuable throughout your career? Is there anything from the early days that stuck with you?
I'd have to say one of my favorite memories from being in training, and probably one of my favorite training officers was Officer Bob Coughlin. And he was the person who had eyes in the back of his head and saw things that, as a young officer, you didn't see happening. And you would think he didn't see anything as you're driving around at 3 in the morning. And he would suddenly ask you, "Hey, did you see the guy riding the bicycle that turned left on the street by the red car?" And you're like, "What? What guy on the street on the bicycle?" And you completely missed everything that he saw. And he always had the most intuition about crimes that were going to happen or people who are up to no good, and really was a good example of paying attention to what's happening out there on the street. And he also had the ability to develop a rapport with people. That was always something that taught me. Probably the first lesson is the biggest skill you have as a police officer is your ability to communicate. And if you can't talk to people and you don't know how to approach people and just have a conversation with them or have an understanding of what they're going through, you're not going to be as successful.
Yeah. And I imagine out of all of the skills that you learn or that it takes to be a great police officer, that's probably one of the ones that it has to come a bit more naturally. You can't study it. You can't really read it in a book. You got to just be able to connect with people, be a good listener. And um, was it something that came naturally to you?
I think part of it did, and part of it was learned. Obviously, starting off as 22, 23, you're going to calls for service where people have been married for 10 or 15 years and they're having an argument and the police have been called. That wasn't an experience at the time that I had. I wasn't married. I hadn't been in a relationship for 10 to 15 years and didn't understand those kind of struggles that people have. So definitely that part of it is something that you learn when you're younger with less life experience. And then as you progress in life and you progress in your career, those are things that you learn, and how to communicate with people about.
Yeah. So I'm sorry I derailed the train for a minute. So after becoming a field training officer, what was next for you?
I was assigned to the canine unit. That was probably my favorite assignment. You really can't go wrong when you go to work every day with a really cool dog in your car. And that's the assignment that everybody wants to come talk to you and they want to know about your dog, and
Hmm.
really get you interacting more with people that when it's not a call for service and they actually want to come talk to you and they want to know more about you, and they're a little more interested and less worried that you're going to give them the ticket or that you're contacting them just to arrest them or because they've done something wrong.
Yeah. And correct, I could be completely erroneous in this, but were you blazing trails even back then, entering the canine unit?
I was the first and still the only female canine handler that the department's had.
Wow.
I keep hoping that somebody is going to come and apply for that assignment behind me.
Yeah. Very, very cool. So what was next after canines?
After canine, I went to work as a detective in the narcotics unit. And I did that for several years. And then I went to work in the family protection unit. And at that time, it wasn't called the family protection unit. It was two different units, one focusing on domestic violence and one focusing on sexual assault and crimes against children. And that's the one that I worked in.
Um, that must have been really hard.
That is a tremendously difficult, emotional, you're dealing with sensitive topics. You're dealing with families who have learned that egregious things have happened to their children or to members of their family. And it's very difficult, but it's very rewarding at the end when a little kid tells you, "Thank you for making the bad guy go away," or "Thank you for stopping the person from hurting me." That's the rewards you get at the end of that.
Yeah. Wow. So from detectives, was Sergeant close behind?
Well, after I worked in that assignment as a detective, I actually went to work for a narcotics task force for a little while, and then I was promoted to sergeant after that.
Very cool. And how long were you a sergeant before you made the next step up to commander?
I think it was about 3 years.
And so were you out on patrol again at that point?
Yes, as a sergeant, I worked in patrol, and then I also worked in our internal affairs unit.
Oh, very cool. And so then what year were you promoted to commander?
I was promoted to commander in 2017.
And blazing trails again, yes?
I was the first female commander for the department as well.
Wow. And what was that like? How does that feel to be like the first?
I think it feels good to be the first, but you don't want to be the last. You want to set the example for other women, whether it be at the Oxnard Police Department or other law enforcement agencies in the county. You want to set the example that they can do it as well. Kind of my philosophy is, as you continue to move up, you should always be reaching the hand behind you to pull someone else up as well. And whether that be mentorship, providing an example, showing them that it can be done, helping them through a promotional process, you should always be reaching behind you to pull others up.
And while you were the first, you haven't been the last. Now we have another female commander here as well, Commander
That's
Sharon
right,
Giles.
Commander Sharon Giles.
Yeah. And so it was about 3 years as a commander till now. And assistant chief, obviously, a lot has said about how it's like we're just so lucky to have our homegrown, department grown first female assistant chief. And one question we have in the Facebook chat here from Carlos Lopez says, what does the day of an assistant chief look like? What kind of assignments do you have throughout the day?
I would say that I'm very fortunate to have this position. However, it's not as fun as being a patrol officer. I spend the majority of my time behind a desk. Lately, I spend the majority of my time, because we don't do as many in-person meetings or events, I spend a lot of time on Zoom, a lot of time looking at policies and looking at the efficiencies of some of the practices we do here in the department, trying to make us more efficient in the service we provide to the community, more efficient in the resources we use, and the staffing. I oversee hiring, training. So right now our big push is how do we recruit qualified candidates, and get people hired and through the academy and retain them as officers, because we do have a pretty significant vacancy in our sworn staff at the moment.
And as we are here on the live Q&A for about another 10 minutes or so, if you're one of the 50 people watching live right now and you have any questions for our assistant chief, go ahead and ask in the Facebook chat and we'll get to it in the next 10 minutes. This is a question that I find interesting that I've gotten a couple of times through social media as I moderate a lot of the department's social media, but this is totally taking the train off the tracks again. But the question from Manuel Barajas is, I've seen your SWAT team leave before making arrests or even entering the house that they went to. Is that a decision to leave? The decision, is that made by the chiefs, or who makes that decision?
That's made mostly by the incident commander on scene. That would be the special operations commander. There is some consultation with the chiefs, the duty chief, or all three chiefs, depending on the circumstances. And that very well could be a situation where there's somebody in the house that might be in crisis, might be having a mental health issue, and there's nobody else in the house that's going to be affected by that. The other family members have left. It isn't a situation where a crime's occurring, and it's better for us to pull back and reevaluate, or let that person to just leave and let that person be in the house, and not force a situation where we may have to use force, or where the person or an officer could get hurt.
And that kind of just segues into the whole this isn't a question from the chat, but the whole issue of de-escalation and how important that is, especially in today's in the line of work, in the officer's line of work in today's world. There's, if there's the opportunity to step away and solve the situation peacefully and by having our presence not there anymore, I think that's, something that the incident commanders, take into account anytime that they're on an incident like that.
Absolutely. Having the officers on scene and surrounding the house and making announcements and having some of our vehicles there, just merely the person seeing that, if they're in crisis or if they're having a mental health, issue at the moment, that could raise their anxiety and their stress level and cause them to do something that they may not do when the officers are not there. And it allows them a little bit of time to decompress and maybe deal with the issue, or us to get resources in, or the family to get resources in that are more appropriate to handle the situation.
Very good. Have a question here from Bill Carr. He wants to know, what areas within the department do you see as priorities? This is interesting because we just had our series of priorities for the year meetings, but what areas within the department do you see as priorities for improvement?
Definitely recruiting and hiring. We have not only the vacancies in our sworn staffing, but raising the level of raising the number of employees that were allotted in our communications center. They are very understaffed, not due to vacancies that they have as well, but just that we handle the volume of calls here that is greater than the county of Ventura handles, but we have less dispatchers in our communication center. So getting the appropriate staffing for not only our communication center, our patrol officers, but some of our civilian staffing areas as well. That's a huge priority this year.
And here's one. It's not a question, but it's a thank you from Mateo Juan Leon. Chief, you helped me with the hiring process with Oxnard, and I'm forever grateful. Thank you, he says. Just wanted to point that out for you.
You're very welcome.
Rosa has a question. We know by neighborhood apps that it looks like there are individuals, I guess a common trend is breaking into cars or home burglaries in the very early morning hours. It's frustrating to see that. Is there a way to increase surveillance during those hours?
We don't necessarily, I'm not sure what she means by surveillance, maybe patrol. When we have hotspots in areas where there are crimes occurring, such as burglaries or thefts from vehicles, we do put that out to the patrol officers to increase their engagement in that area, in those communities. And we also definitely strongly suggest that people not leave opportunities for individuals to come and either break into the car or steal something from the car if the vehicle's left open. Definitely don't leave anything that even, you may not think it's of value, but to somebody who doesn't have a cell phone charging port and you leave it available on the front seat and that's something that they need at the moment, that could cause somebody to smash a window or try to get into a vehicle to steal it. So we definitely, you put the onus on, not leaving any opportunities. But when there are neighborhoods that do have that increase in frequency, we do put that to our patrol officers to increase their patrols in the area.
We have time for a couple of more before we wrap it up here, and just a couple left. So thank you everybody for being here with us. Eric Cole has a question about camping in RVs. This might be more of a code compliance city ordinance issue, but why is camping in RVs allowed on the side of the road?
That would probably be more a code enforcement issue. We do address, or code enforcement does address, those that are living in motorhomes. Obviously, the parks and the bathrooms in the parks are open to all the public, so we can't limit the number of people or who uses them. Obviously, urinating and defecating on the sidewalk is a city ordinance violation, and when our officers do see that, they do take enforcement action.
And this kind of ties into Emmanuel's next question. He says, will you be addressing the homeless issue downtown in Oxnard? But I think more appropriately, it's what are we doing to address that?
Well, to be homeless is not a crime. We definitely, want to make, you can't arrest somebody for being homeless. We do address issues with vagrancy when there are, subjects loitering in front of businesses that are, causing issues with the business. We have a homeless liaison unit that works with the homeless to provide them services, to try to get them out of their homeless situation, to, in some instances, reconnect them with family, either in the area or out of the area, or to provide them with resources that allows them to apply for jobs, such as getting them IDs, getting them places where they can receive mail, all the things that you need for a job application to apply for. We also have backpack medicine that happens, where we have multiple services that go out together with our homeless liaison officers and contact those that are experiencing homelessness, not only in the downtown area, but in other areas of the city. And this provides them medical services, drug and alcohol counseling. And there are going to be those people that are resistant to services. And that, I think, is a problem that no one really has the answer to at the moment. And it's a problem that's being experienced all throughout the county and all throughout our country.
Since we have some great questions here, we'll grab a couple of more, and these will be the last two before we wrap it up. But Len Newcomb asks, what is the department's position on the recent city council letting street vendors conduct business without the taxes, permits, and fees that other businesses have?
I probably don't have the best answer on that question. Our street vending and business licensing is handled by our code enforcement department, and that's not overseen by the police department.
Miguel asks, any update on security improvements at the collection in conjunction with what private property is already doing there?
I don't know what the collection's doing to improve their security. I don't have an answer to that one, unfortunately, for you. We do respond to calls for service that we receive, not only from the businesses at the collection, but when their security personnel calls us for assistance. We have officers that are dedicated to that area to respond to calls and patrol that area specifically. And in some instances, we connect the businesses with our district coordinator, or who's the officer that's assigned to that specific district to handle quality of life and crime issues there.
All right. And Ruth asked one last question. I know you won't have the answer right off the bat, but I mean, maybe you do, and you're just, but she wants to know what the 3 most dangerous intersections in the city are. I think if you gave our traffic desk a call, they might be able to help you out better with that. But I know traffic safety is definitely one of the things that we continuously try to improve here at the department, and always looking at ways, working with the city and the traffic engineers for the city, and trying to figure out ways to make our streets safer for everybody out there. Well, thank you, Assistant Chief Shadinger. Before we go, I've got some rapid fire questions. I do these at the end of these. It's a lot of fun. And I just ask you silly things like, what was the first concert you ever went to?
It was The Cure in Santa Barbara.
Oh, nice. Was it the Santa Barbara Bowl?
It was.
Wow. My first concert was at the Santa Barbara Bowl, but mine was Matchbox 20. Not the same, but the same kind of. First vehicle you ever owned?
It was a 72 Volkswagen Bug.
Favorite meal to order out?
Oh, pizza.
Favorite meal to make at home?
Ooh, tamales or enchiladas?
Nice. 3 of your top 10 movies?
Ooh, I'd have to say Shawshank Redemption, John Wick, the first one.
Okay.
And you're all gonna laugh, either Up or Finding Nemo.
Nice. Why would we laugh? Those are both solid choices. And lastly, let's how about 3 songs that are spinning in your iPod?
Oh my goodness, that is super tough. I feel like I don't listen to music as much as I used to.
What is one of your top 3 favorite songs?
Oh my gosh, these are harder questions that they were sending in on the chat.
Is it a
Top
Cure song?
favorite
Okay.
songs. Gosh, I don't even have an answer to that one. I'm drawing a
Top
blank.
top Cure song.
Top Cure song. Oh my goodness. I can't even remember a Cure song now. You're putting me on the spot, Paul.
All right. Well, we did ask you some tough things here, so I completely understand, and it is the end of the day. So thank you again so much for joining us here on Straight to You, live from the Oxnard Police Department. And of course, if anybody wants to contact you, is there a way that they can do that?
They can contact me by email, which is my first name dot last name at oxnardpd.org, Denise Shadinger at oxnardpd.org. Or they can call. That's probably email is probably the easiest and I think the most comfortable for people to call in. Or they can call my desk line at 385-7626.
Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you everybody for tuning in and for those great questions. And have a great rest of your night, everybody out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.